The Prisoner of Azkaban is widely regarded as the best Harry Potter movie out of the 8 in the adapted series. This is due to the movie's style and the way it was shot, the maturity of the actors who had at that point grown more into their roles, and the more serious overall tone of the story versus the first two in J.K. Rowling's series. But despite the film being one of the greatest, it still chose to rewrite and revise a decent amount of the original story. So today, we're going to unpack the two crucial moments that kick off and set up Harry's third year at Hogwarts. And I'll reveal every change, revision, and omission that the film made to the book that inspired it. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 32 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. This is the show where I take the Harry Potter movies and go scene by scene, comparing them to the original books and finding every difference along the way. If you're new here, this is the start of season 3, since we just completed the Chamber of Secrets. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out the series playlist on my channel to go back and watch every episode covering Harry's first and second years. Real quick before we get into the scene recap, I wanted to give a shout out to this commenter from a previous episode. Each week, I highlight one of the top comments from a past video, so be sure to share your thoughts down below when you're finished watching. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happens during this first part of this iconic movie. To start things off, we zoom into the Dursleys' home and see Harry practicing a spell under the covers while avoiding being seen by his Uncle Vernon. Then the movie cuts to the next day as Aunt Marge arrives, and Harry tries to get Uncle Vernon to sign a permission slip for Hogwarts. Vernon says maybe he will if Harry behaves, and then we fast forward to the evening when they're having dinner, and Harry's putting up with all of Aunt Marge's insanity. But eventually, it gets to be too much for him as she starts to insult his parents, and his anger causes Aunt Marge to swell up like a balloon and float away into the sky. Harry then packs up his things and runs away from the Dursleys as he has had enough of their antics. We then see Harry come to rest on a curb in the neighborhood, and suddenly he gets a weird feeling that something is watching him. He stands up and looks across the street, seeing a dog on the other side, and then Harry falls backwards as the dog barks at him. To his surprise, a giant triple-decker bus comes rolling into view right after his fall, and Harry is introduced to the night bus by the conductor, Stan Shunpike. After getting on board, Harry is jolted around as the bus takes off like a bullet and navigates through the busy streets of London. We then see a series of events with the bus, like them almost running over an old lady, nearly having a head-on collision with 2 other buses, and maybe most importantly, Harry asks about a man on Stan's paper. Stan tells Harry that it's Sirius Black, a big supporter of you-know-who. Eventually, they make it to the Leaky Cauldron, and Harry is greeted by Tom the innkeeper, who takes him up to a room which contains Hedwig, who had flown there ahead of Harry, and the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Cornelius Fudge begins talking and informs Harry that Aunt Marge was safely located, punctured, and her memory was wiped. So no harm, no foul, and to Harry's shock, he is let off the hook. But Fudge does tell Harry that while he is staying at the Leaky Cauldron, he must not go out into the Muggle world. And after this ominous request, Harry is led to his room where he finds his school books. Harry then picks up one of the strange-looking books, which is called the Monster Book of Monsters, and it has a belt wrapped around it. Harry undoes it, causing the book to come alive, and it starts trying to bite him. Harry drops the book and jumps on the bed, and then uses his shoe to lure the strange monster book out from under the bed so he can jump on it and trap it again. And that is where scenes end for this week. I know we kind of went further than you probably thought we would, but once we get to the plot changes, you'll understand why I included the final scene with the monster book. Anyway, let's kick things off with our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First, for characters, we're missing Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid. None of them make an appearance in the book, but they write Harry letters which are covered in the first chapter. Other than that, the characters we see in the movie are pretty much the only ones in the book. As for characters we see who are changed, I would say that Stan Shunpike looks way older than he should be. And I don't think Tom the innkeeper is ever described as a hunchback in the book. Also, I guess if the shrunken heads count as characters, then that's wrong too, because there are no shrunken heads in the Harry Potter books. Although in a later interview, J.K. Rowling did say that she wished she would have thought of them, and she endorsed the idea. But since the shrunken heads aren't in the book, Ern is actually the one who does the talking in the night bus, so I guess that's a character change as well, since the movie made Ern a sandwich-eating mute. Next, we have timeline, which only has one change, and that is that Harry spends almost a whole week with Aunt Marge before blowing her up. But obviously, in order to save time in the movie, they just condensed this to what we can assume would be one day. Finally, there's location, which I think is pretty accurate this week. We see the Dursleys, the night bus, and the Leaky Cauldron. Other than that, I don't think any other key locations are mentioned in the book, so our location category gets a pass for this week. Now, before I go into the rest of the changes, I just want to remind you that I can't go word for word through the dialogue, because that would take forever. Instead, I highly recommend you check out the audiobooks on Audible if you're looking to relive these moments for yourself. You can claim your free trial using my link in the description, which gets you one free audiobook and supports the channel at the same time. That being said, let's jump into the plot changes. To start off our plot changes for this week, we've got an easy one, which is that Harry isn't doing Lumos under his covers at night like what we see at the beginning of the film. Instead, Harry is working on an essay for school. In the book, almost every year of Harry's school, we hear about the homework he's given over the summer. Obviously, for Harry, it's hard to get this done because the Dursleys didn't allow anything magic related to be done in their home, hence why Harry is doing it at night under his covers. But I get why they changed this to Lumos. They didn't have time to explain the context of why Harry was writing an essay, and the Lumos spell is used many times during this year in Harry's life, so this is a way for the film to prep the viewer on what the spell does. The next change we have is the omission of Ron's call to the Dursleys. Now, we don't ever see this call happen real time in the book, but we get filled on the details afterwards during the catch-up of the summer. Evidently, Harry was on thin ice with the Dursleys because 1 week into summer vacation, Ron called their home and Vernon answered. Ron, not knowing how a phone worked, shouted at Vernon asking if Harry was home, and Vernon got very offended by being yelled at and shouted back at Ron to never call again. Ron then must have told Hermione to steer clear of calling as well, and therefore Harry hadn't received any letters or calls from his friends all summer. Which brings us to our next change, which is the fact that the movie removed Harry receiving several letters and packages for his birthday. Also, this would have been the same night we see him doing Lumos, aka writing an essay, under his covers. In the book, we read that as he put away his school and magical items under a loose floorboard in his room, he looked at the clock and realized that it was 1 a.m. He had been 13 for a whole hour. Then around that same time, he looked out the window and saw several owls flying towards him, or rather 2 owls flying while carrying another owl. Of course, 2 of these 3 were Hedwig and Errol, and the third was an owl from Hogwarts. These owls delivered 3 letters, 3 parcels, and then finally Harry's usual Hogwarts letter with instructions for the upcoming school year. I won't dive into all the details of the letters, but the gist of it is that each one was a birthday present for Harry. Except for the Hogwarts one, of course, which was the usual reminder to be at King's Cross for the Hogwarts Express, and it also mentioned that in order to visit Hogsmeade this year, they would need signatures from the students' legal guardians. But as for the birthday notes, Ron filled Harry in on his family's trip to Egypt, as the Weasleys had won 700 galleons from the Daily Prophet raffle. As for the birthday notes, Ron filled Harry in on his family's trip to Egypt, and gave him a sneakoscope for his birthday, which is a magical object that spins and lights up if someone around isn't trustworthy. Then Hermione wished Harry a happy birthday and gifted him a broomstick servicing kit, and also Ron and Hermione both asked Harry if he would be able to meet them next week in Diagon Alley to go shopping. Lastly, for the packages, Hagrid sent Harry his usual birthday best wishes and also gave him the Monster Book of Monsters. Which brings us to our next change. This is kind of skipping ahead, but the movie switched around the timing of when Harry receives this book. Plus, they change how he receives it. As we know from the final moments of this week's scenes, Fudge had Harry's books brought to his room at the Leaky Cauldron, and Harry dealt with the monster book there. Well, how it actually happens is Hagrid gifts Harry the book for his birthday and writes a letter saying that he won't reveal anything else, but this gift is a sneak peek of some exciting things to come for this school year. Obviously, this is foreshadowing for Hagrid's new role at Hogwarts. Harry then had to wrestle the book quietly so as not to wake the Dursleys, and then took one of his belts and wrapped it around the book to keep it shut. And that ends things off for the first chapter of the book, and our next change picks up with the next morning when the next chapter begins. You see, in the book, as you might have guessed, we don't go straight to Aunt Marge's arrival like the movie does. Nope, there's at least a little in-between time in which 2 key moments are omitted. First, the movie removed breakfast at the Dursleys, which is important because Vernon watches the morning news and he hears a report of an escaped murderer who is roaming around London. The news showed a picture of the man, who is none other than Sirius Black, but the news doesn't say his name or where he escaped from, which angers Vernon as he says it's useless information unless they know where the crazy person came from. This moment in the book is crucial because it's what makes Harry so curious about Stan's newspaper in the night bus. He only asks about Sirius Black because he recognizes the picture as the same man who was on the Muggle news. Without this breakfast scene, there's really no reason for Harry to care about what's in the Daily Prophet. The next change is that Harry asks his Uncle Vernon for his signature before he leaves to go get Marge, not after they arrive at the house. Vernon tells him perhaps if he behaves, and then informs Harry that he told Marge that Harry goes to a school for incurably criminal boys named St. Brutus's. Harry is outraged by this, but then he has an idea, as he strongly hints to his uncle that he could easily slip up and tell Marge the truth. He then goes on to tell Vernon that he will play nice and keep up the act as long as he gets a signature on his permission slip when it's all over. Vernon reluctantly agrees and then leaves to go get Marge. The other key part to this change is that because of this agreement, Harry runs upstairs and tells Hedwig that she has to go away for a week and not be seen. He then wrote a letter to Ron explaining the situation and told Hedwig to go with Errol and stay at the Weasleys for the week. Then after hiding all of his magical items and making sure to be as muggle-like as possible, Harry was ready for Aunt Marge. And that takes us into our next two changes, which revolve around this horrible woman and her visit at the Dursleys. If you ever thought that no one could be as bad as the Dursleys, well, Vernon's sister proves that he is the nice one of the family. And the first change regarding Aunt Marge is the fact that the conversation we see in the movie is actually 3 different moments combined from the book. Like I mentioned in the timeline changes, Harry made it pretty much until the final day of Marge's visit before he had his outburst, and we see a few scenes from the week in the book. First, we read about Marge's arrival and her questioning Harry about St. Brutus's, asking if they beat the students. Then a few days pass, and we read about Marge drinking a little too much and saying that Harry turned out the way he did because of his mom, and that's the moment that her glass of wine bursts. But Harry makes it through this instance, and it isn't until a few more days that Harry officially breaks, causing Marge to blow up after she says that his parents died in a car crash and his dad was a drunk. A key thing to note here is that Harry was keeping his cool not only for the Hogsmeade permission slip, but also because he knew that if he did any magic, he would be expelled. After all, the previous year he had gotten an official warning from the Ministry because of Dobby's visit. Before I move past this moment though and head into Harry leaving the Dursleys and getting on the night bus, I have one last change to mention with Marge, which is that she only blew up and floated to the ceiling. She never bounced outside and floated away into the sky like the movie shows, although that's a very funny moment. But now back to Harry's magical incident, it's important to note for this next change that in the book, Harry is leaving the Dursleys not just because he hates them, but because he feels like he now needs to go on the run. After all, he's committed a crime by performing magic in front of a muggle for the second time, and he is scared that they'll send him to Azkaban. So that's why he packs up and heads out. And that context helps us explain the next change, which is the omission of Harry's original plan. You see, he originally thought through his options and decided to cast a levitation charm on his luggage and then put on his invisibility cloak and use his broomstick to fly away into the night without being seen. Then he would live on the run as an outcast in the wizarding world. And he didn't mind doing more magic because in his mind, he had already broken the rules, so who cares? Well, thankfully, right when he was about to execute this plan, he felt like someone was watching him and turned around to see a massive dog across the street. Then, just like in the movie, he fell over and the night bus appeared. And on that note, we can take a look at all the things the movie changed about this iconic scene. The entire Prisoner of Azkaban movie is noted as one of the most unique in the way it is shot, but this scene really kicks things off and showcases the director's vision. It is a great moment in the movie, but if you've never read the books, then you really don't know the true story, since most of the scene is made up. The first few changes we have regarding the night bus are pretty simple, but they add up to make this moment quite different from the book. First, Harry falls forward, not backward, and because of this, he nearly gets run over by the bus. Second, when Stan asks why Harry fell over, Harry looks where the dog was, and he actually tells Stan what he saw. Third, Stan asks what's on Harry's forehead, and Harry quickly covered up his scar and said nothing. Then Stan asked what Harry's name was, and Harry said Neville Longbottom. The movie kind of has a moment inspired by this, in which Stan asks Harry what he said his name was, and Harry said, "I didn't." Then they just leave it at that. The fourth change is that Harry has to pay for his ticket, and he asks how much it is to get to London. Then after he hands over the money, Stan shows him to his bed. This also means that Harry never says the leaky cauldron that's in London, causing Stan in the shrunken head to laugh at him. The fifth change is that Harry had to wait his turn to be taken to the leaky cauldron, and technically he asked to be taken to Diagon Alley, but of course the entrance is in the pub, so they took him there. The movie just shows the bus going directly to the leaky cauldron, but Harry talks with Stan and Ern as he waits for the other passengers to get to their destinations in the book. And that brings us to the most important change regarding the night bus, which directly relates to Sirius Black. Like I said, as Harry waited, he spoke with Stan and Ern, who told him about the man on the paper. You know how in the movie Harry doesn't learn about the details of Sirius's crime until later? Well, Stan actually reveals all to Harry right in the bus. After Harry read the paper, which mentioned that Sirius had murdered 13 people with one curse, Stan and Ern filled Harry in on the event, telling him that after Voldemort disappeared, all his followers were tracked down. They go on to say that Sirius was one of the last to be captured, and after being cornered, he blew up a street and laughed after he did it. Then the Ministry of Magic said it was a gas explosion and had to wipe all the Muggles' memories. Now, of course, this is a modified version of the truth, as we'll learn later in the story, But in the movie, we only get about 10% of this information, and don't learn the fake story until later when Harry enters Hogsmeade and eavesdrops on Fudge and McGonagall's conversation with Madame Rosmerta. But after this dark talk, Ern asks Stan to change the subject, as he had just begun to mention the Azkaban guards. Finally, after a few more stops, it was Harry's turn to be taken to Diagon Alley, and upon arriving at the Leaky Cauldron, we have our next change. The movie shows Tom the innkeeper coming out to get Harry, but in the book, the Minister of Magic himself was waiting on the doorstep to greet him. Of course, when Harry saw this, he thought he was done for and was going to be taken straight to Azkaban. But after being taken upstairs to a private room, the minister told Harry that it was all okay, similarly to what we see in the movie. Also, a funny thing to note is that the book includes Stan and Ern's reaction to learning it's Harry Potter. And for fans of the series, you'll know that this isn't the last time we'll hear about Stan Shunpike. But moving on to our next change, the book has a bit more conversation between Harry and Fudge. First, Harry gives Fudge way more pushback than we see in the movie. He almost gets upset at the fact that he's not in trouble, simply because he's so confused by the leniency of the Ministry. Also, after realizing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he asked Fudge to sign his Hogsmeade permission slip. After all, he's the Minister of Magic. Surely Hogwarts would accept that, right? But Fudge says that he can't sign it since he's not Harry's legal guardians. This is probably the moment that inspired Harry asking McGonagall later in the movie, but it makes more sense in this context as the minister's signature would hold more weight. But Harry is slowly realizing that something else is going on, and that possibly they didn't want him going to Hogsmeade. Soon he'll learn the truth of this, which we'll cover in the next episode. But as for this week, that wraps up all of our changes. So now that you've heard it all, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you excited that we're finally diving into the most iconic Harry Potter movie? Let me know what scene you're most looking forward to hearing about in this season of Movies vs. Manuscripts. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you're new, and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.